Panzerkampfwagen IV formed the backbone of the German tank units in World War II. It was produced in greater numbers between 1933 and 1945 than any other German main battle tank of the time. The H version, which for the first time featured side skirts to increase armor protection, was built from 1943 to 1944. The model. True to original surface details. Movable turret with storage box, MG34, side skirts, an injection molded track with individual links and sections, and it's an authentic representation of the following versions: the 20th Panzer Division Staff, Russia, Tarnopol, 1944, and the 23rd Panzer Division, 6th Company, Hungary, 1944. Scope of delivery. It's a kit included building, instructions, and decals. The introduction of the longer 7.5 centimeter gun-armed Panzer IV G changed the role of the Panzer IV tank type significantly within the German Wehrmacht. The 7.5 L43 guns were more than capable of dealing with most tanks on the battlefield in 1942. Given its excellent performance, more better-armed Panzer IVs were requested. This would lead to the introduction of the H version. It was, in essence, the same vehicle as the Model G, with some minor modifications to facilitate easier production. Thanks to its larger production, firepower, and improved armor, the Panzer IV Model H would become the backbone of the Panzer divisions from 1943 until the end of the war. The real Panzer IV Ausf H. By 1943, Adolf Hitler and his commanding officers were quite aware of the huge tank losses suffered in the previous years, mostly while fighting in the Soviet Union. In order to hopefully increase the overall production of the tanks, at the start of 1943, Adolf Hitler appointed Albert Speer, the German Minister of Armament, to supervise the entire war production. At that time, other tank projects, such as the Tiger and the Panther, were underway. These inevitably affected the production of other vehicles, including the Panzer IV. Speer soon informed Hitler that an increase in production was only possible if it focused on the Panzer IV and the Stug III. Attempts to increase production showed results. For example, Nibelungenwerk increased its Panzer IV output by 20 vehicles per month during 1943 of March. On the other hand, problems with deliveries of necessary parts were becoming an ever-present threat to the German tank program, which would only worsen as the years progressed. In March, General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the Inspector General of the Armored Troops, informed Hitler that the Panzer Division strength could only be reinforced by focusing on the production of Panzer IV tanks. In addition, he argued that the Panzer IV had to remain in production for the next 2 years. While Hitler agreed, this decision would often be ignored and bypassed, reducing the Panzer IV production in favor of anti-tank and assault gun versions based on its chassis. Considerable resources also went into the development and production of the larger Tiger and Panther tanks. The further development of the Panzer IV led to the introduction of the H version. There is a common misconception about the difference between it and the previous G version, which is commonly attributed to the barrel length. In reality, the latter built G model received the same L48 long gun as employed on the Model H. The two tank versions were the same, to the point one may even ask why bother giving a new designation to it. The Model H initially meant to have a new hydraulically operated turret. In order to implement rationalization and ease production, this turret was to be completely compatible with both Panzer III and Panzer IV. In the end, nothing came of this proposal, and the vehicles instead were equipped with the Panzer IV G turret with increased roof thickness. Interestingly, another attempt at improving the tank was made in 1944 when Krupp proposed a Panzer IV turret designated as Vereinfachten Turm, English, simplified turret. It did not have visor ports, nor a command cupola. The right side hatch was removed. The front armor was 80 millimeters thick, and the side and rear were 42 millimeters placed at 25 degrees. Despite this, by mid-1944, the decision was already made to slowly terminate Panzer IV production in favor of the anti-tank version based on its chassis. Investing in a new turret, despite some benefits, seemed redundant and nothing came of it. While proposed turret projects led nowhere, the improvement of the front drive elements was seen as highly important. Steps were made to quickly develop and implement a much more durable drive. Aside from the small changes, the Panzer IV Model H was virtually identical to the previous version of the vehicle. Production. The German attempts to increase overall tank production truly kicked in with the Panzer IV Ausf H during 1943, reaching a monthly production of almost 300, with a maximum of 354 tanks built in December. In comparison, some early 4 versions needed over a year to produce such quantities. For example, during 1941, on average, the monthly Panzer IV production was around 40 tanks. The Panzer Ausf H was produced by Krupp, Volmag, and Nibelungwerk. Over 100 companies of various sizes would be included in its overall production. Huge production orders were given to Krupp and Volmag to produce 1,400 tanks each, and Nibelungwerk a further 1,900. Despite being heavily involved in Panzer IV production, Krupp only produced 381 H models by December 1943. During 1943, Krupp was in somewhat chaotic state due to constant changes in the production orders. For example, in 1943, Krupp was ordered to completely abandon production of the Panzer IV in favor of the Panther I and II. In August, this was changed again, with Krupp receiving orders to manufacture some 150 Panzer IVs. In late August, this order was once again changed to 100 vehicles per month. In the end, the Panzer IV production was abandoned by Krupp in favor of the Sturmgeschütz IV assault gun. The Volmag productions were even higher at 693. Finally, by the time production ended in 1944, Nibelungwerk managed to build some 1,250 Panzer IV Ausf H models. An additional 90 chassis built at Nibelungwerk were used for the Sturmgeschütz IV 30 and Sturmpanzer IV 60 during the period from May 1943 to February 1944. In total, some 2,322 Panzer IV Ausf H's would be built. However, like so many German production numbers, there are some disagreements between sources. Design. The hull received only a few minor modifications, the most important of which was the introduction of an interlocking front glacis and superstructure armor with the sides of the vehicle for better rigidity starting from December 1943. The overall design of the suspension remained the same. The difference was the reduction to 3 return rollers. In order to save rubber, these were made completely out of metal. In addition, the welded rear idler would be replaced from October 1943 by a new cast one starting. Some sources also mentioned that a new SSG 77 6-speed transmission was used on Model H. This seems to be some sort of misidentification, however, as sources also say that the Model G utilized this transmission. In order to further simplify suspension production, some other minor changes were introduced. For example, the cast bump stop mountings were replaced with new welded mounts. The road wheels cast caps were replaced with slightly redesigned forged caps. It is important to note that not all vehicles received these modifications and that some continued to use older components. It was first designed in 1936. Its unit cost was 115,962 Reichsmarks with the 7.5 centimeter KWK-40 L43 gun. Produced 1936 to 1945, 8,553 of all tank variants were built. Its mass was 25 tons. It had a length of 19 feet 5 inches and a length of 23 feet with its gun forward. Its width was 9 feet 5 inches and its height was 8 feet 10 inches. It had a crew of 5, a commander, a gunner, a loader, a driver, and a radio operator who was also the bow machine gunner. Its armor at the hull was 3.1 inches. On the side was 1.2. The rear, 0.79. The whole roof and armor floor was 0.39. The Scherzin was 0.2 inches and 0.31 inches respectively. The turret front was 2 inches. The turret side and rear was 1.2, and the turret roof was 0.39. Its main armament was the L-48 main gun, which it carried 87 rounds of. Secondary armament was two 7.92 mm MG-34 machine guns, which it carried 3,150 rounds of. Its engine was a Maybach HL-120 TRM 12-cylinder petrol engine with 296 horsepower or 220 kilowatts. Its power weight was 12 PS or 8.8 kilowatts per ton. The transmission was a Synchro Mesh ZF SSG 77 with 8 forward and 1 reverse ratio. It had a leaf spring suspension. Its fuel capacity was 120 to 180 US gallons. Its operational range on road was 146 to 199 miles and cross-country 75 to 130 miles. Its maximum speed was 24 to 26 miles per hour, 16 miles an hour max sustained road speed, and 9.9 off-road. The Panzer IV was the only German tank to remain in both production and combat throughout World War II, and measured over the entire war it comprised 30% of the Wehrmacht's total tank strength. Although in service by early 1939, in time for the occupation of Czechoslovakia, the start of the war, the majority of German armor was made up of the obsolete Panzer Is and Panzer IIs. The Panzer I in particular had already proven inferior to Soviet tanks, such as the T-26, during the Spanish Civil War. When Germany invaded Poland on 1 September 1939, its armored tanks was composed of 1,445 Panzer Is, 1,223 Panzer IIs, 98 Panzer IIIs, and 211 Panzer IVs. The more modern vehicles amounted to less than 10% of Germany's armored strength. Despite increased production of the medium Panzer IIIs and IVs prior to the German invasion of France on 10th May 1940, the majority of German tanks were still light types. According to Heinz Guderian, the Wehrmacht invaded France with 523 Panzer Is, 955 Panzer IIs, 349 Panzer IIIs, 279 Panzer IVs, 106 Panzer 35Ts, and 228 Panzer 38Ts. Through the use of tactical radios and superior tactics, the Germans were able to outmaneuver and defeat the British armor. However, Panzer IVs armed with the KWK-37 L-24 75mm tank gun found it difficult to engage tanks such as the Suma S-35 and the Char B-1. The S-35 had a maximum armor thickness of 55mm, while the L-24 could only penetrate 43mm at a range of 2,300 feet. The British Matilda II was also heavily armored, with at least 70mm of steel on the front and turret and a minimum of 65 on the sides, but were few in number. Although the Panzer IV was deployed to North Africa with the German Afrika Korps, until the longer gun variant began production, the tank was outperformed by the Panzer III with respect to armor penetration. The Panzer IV also took part in the invasion of Yugoslavia and the invasion of Greece in early 1941. Eastern Front. With the launching of Operation Barbarossa on 22nd June 1941, it prompted an upgrade of the Panzer IV's 75mm gun to a longer, high-velocity gun suitable for anti-tank use. This meant that it could now penetrate the T-34 at ranges of up to 3,900 feet at any angle. The 75mm KWK-40 L-43 gun on the Panzer IV could penetrate a T-34 at a variety of impact angles beyond 3,300 feet range and up to 1,600 meters or 5,200 feet. Shipment of the first model to mount the new gun, the Ausf F2, began in spring 1942, and by the summer offensive there were around 135 Panzer IVs with the L-43 tank gun available. At the time, these were the only German tanks that could defeat the T-34 and KV-1 with sheer firepower. They played a crucial role in the events that unfolded between June 1942 and March 1943, and the Panzer IV became the mainstay of the German panzer divisions. The extent of German reliance on the Panzer IV during this period is reflected by their losses. 502 were destroyed on the Eastern Front in 1942. The Panzer IV continued to play an important role during operations in 1943, including the Battle of Kursk. Newer types, such as the Panther, were still experiencing crippling reliability problems that restricted their combat efficiency. So much of the effort fell to the 841 Panzer IVs that took part in the battle that throughout 1943, the German lost 2,352 Panzer IVs on the Eastern Front alone. Some divisions were reduced to 12 to 18 tanks by the end of the year. In 1944, a further 2,643 Panzer IVs were destroyed, and such losses were becoming increasingly difficult to replace. Nevertheless, due to the shortage of replacement of Panther tanks, the Panzer IV continued to form the core of Germany's armored divisions, including elite units such as the 2nd SS Panzer Corps throughout 1944. In January 1945, 287 Panzer IVs were lost on the Eastern Front. It is estimated that combat against Soviet forces accounted for 6,153 Panzer IVs, or about 75% of all Panzer IV losses during the war. Western Front. Panzer IVs comprised around half of the available German tank strength on the Western Front prior to the Allied invasion of Normandy on 6 June 1944. Most of the 11 panzer divisions that saw action at Normandy initially contained an armored regiment of 1 battalion of Panzer IVs and another of Panthers for around a total of 160 tanks, although Waffen-SS panzer divisions were generally larger and better equipped than their Heer counterparts. Regular upgrades to the Panzer IV helped maintain its reputation as a formidable opponent. By August 1944, as the last surviving troops of the 5th Panzer Army and 7th Army began retreating towards Germany, the two cataclysms of the Falaise Pocket and the Seine Crossing cost the Wehrmacht dearly. Of the 2,300 tanks and assault guns it had committed to Normandy, including around 750 Panzer IVs, over 2,200 had been lost. Field Marshal Walter Model reported to Hitler that his panzer divisions had remaining on average 5 or 6 tanks each. During the winter of 1944-1945, the Panzer IV was one of the most numerous tanks used in the Ardennes offensive, where further heavy losses, as often due to fuel shortages as were to enemy action, impaired major German armored operations in the West thereafter. Panzer IVs that took part were survivors of the battles in France between June and September 1944, with around 260 additional Panzer IV Ausf Js issued as reinforcements. Other users. Finland bought 15 new Panzer IV Ausf Js in 1944 for 5 million Finnish markas each. The remainder of an order for 40 tanks and some Stug 3 units were not delivered, and neither were necessary German tank instructors provided. The tanks arrived too late to see action against the Soviet Union, but instead ended up being used against Nazi Germany during their withdrawal through Lapland. After 1945, Bulgaria incorporated its surviving Panzer IVs into defensive bunkers as strongpoints along its border with Turkey, along with Soviet T-34 turrets. This defensive line, known as the Kryly-Marko line, remained in use until the fall of communism in 1989. 20 Panzer IVs and 10 Stug 3s were supplied to Spain in December 1943, a small fraction of what Spain had originally asked for. The Panzer IV represented the best tank in Spanish service between 1944 and 1954 and was deployed along with T-26s and Panzer Is. Spain sold 17 Panzer IVs to Syria in 1967, with the 3 remaining left to be conserved. These can be found in Madrid, Burgos, and Valladolid. Most of the tanks Romania had received were lost during combat between 1944 and 1945. These tanks, designated T4 in the Army's inventory, were used by the Army's 2nd Armored Regiment. On 9th May 1945, only 2 Panzer IVs were left. Romania received another 50 captured Panzer IV tanks from the Red Army after the end of the war. These tanks were of many different models and were in very bad shape, many of them missing parts and side skirts. These German T4 tanks remained in service until 1950, when the Army decided to use only Soviet equipment. By 1954, all German tanks in Romanian military service had been scrapped. While their numbers are uncertain, Syria received around 60 Panzers that were refurbished in France between 1950 and 1952, followed by 50 others received from Czechoslovakia in 1954 per the Czechoslovakian-Syrian arms deal. A Soviet 12.7 DSHK machine gun on an anti-aircraft mount was retrofitted on the cupola. These ex-German tanks were used to shell Israeli settlements between the Golan Heights, together with the Soviet-supplied T-34s, and were fired upon in 1965 during the Water War by Israeli Super Sherman and Centurion tanks. Syria received 17 Panzer IVs from Spain, with these seeing combat during the Six-Day War in 1967. Panzer IVs also participated in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, with some being dug in as pillboxes. In addition, Turkey was a buyer, with 35 Panzer IVs received until 4th May 1944 in exchange for some chromium ore. Delivery began with the Ausf G and probably went on with Ausf H versions. Other sources state that only 15 to 22 tanks were delivered in 1943, and they were all of the G version. Lastly, want to leave you with a reliability report from a German officer. From an after-action report submitted by Panzer Regiment 6 on 23 July 1941, the workshop company added some further notes. In contrast to the deployment in the West, the large amount of dust generated in Russia caused disproportionately more engine damage. Almost all engine wear can be attributed to dust accumulation. This could have been reduced by carefully cleaning the air filters and changing the engine oil frequently. The regiment has been in uninterrupted combat for 4 weeks, so that too little time could be made available for this maintenance work. The mileage of the engines could have been increased by about 300 kilometers to 500 kilometers with appropriate care. The mileage in service of each Panzerkampfwagen totaled to 1,100 kilometers to 1,500 kilometers. Damage to the running gear can be described as normal. After that report in 1944, an Inspector General of Armored Troops acknowledged this in a report. That's over 3 years. And this report confirms the opinion. Thanks to the continuous improvement of its components, the life of the Panther tank has increased. The average lifespan of the tank can now be roughly equal to that of another tank, with around 15 to 2,000 kilometers between two major repair and maintenance processes, and gearboxes also have a longer life. Even so, in several cases, at approximately 1,500 kilometers, the gearbox has broken down and the boxes have to be replaced.